Chapter 4 of Philosophical Essays by Bertrand Russell. Second half. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Landon D.C. Elkind at the University of Iowa in Coralville, Iowa. Pragmatism. Pragmatists are never weary of inveighing against those who say that our beliefs ought not to be influenced by considerations which in fact do influence them. They point triumphantly to the influence of desire upon belief, and boast that their theory alone is based upon a true psychological account of how belief arises. With this account we have no quarrel. What we deny is its relevance to the question, what is meant by truth and falsehood? At first sight, it might seem a perfectly proper inductive proceeding to inquire what properties a belief must have in order that we may call it true, and to infer that those properties constitute the meaning of truth. There is, however, a fallacy in this method of inquiry, and this fallacy, in our opinion, is at the bottom of the whole pragmatist philosophy. There is, in the first place, an ambiguity in the word meaning. We may say that cloud means rain, or we may say pluie means rain. It is obvious that these two senses of meaning are wholly different. What they have in common is that in each case we have one thing which points to another. The cloud is a sign that rain is coming. The word pluie is a sign which signifies rain. But beyond this, the two senses of meaning have little in common. In the first sense, one thing means another when the existence, past, present, or future, of the other can be inferred from the one, that is, when there is a causal connection between them. In the second sense, meaning is confined to symbols, that is, to words, and whatever other ways may be employed for communicating our thoughts. It is this second sense of meaning which we expect a dictionary to give us. When we ask, what does such and such a word mean, what we want to know is, what is in the mind of a person using the word. A confusion of the two senses of meaning is not uncommon in philosophy, and if we are not mistaken, pragmatism has confused them in its inquiry as to the meaning of truth. It has discovered something which has a causal connection with our beliefs that things are true, and which, therefore, in the first sense of meaning, may be taken to be what these beliefs mean. It has then supposed that this is what is meant in the second sense by truth, that is, what we have in mind, or should have in mind, when we use the word truth. This confusion between the two senses of meaning seems to be necessarily involved in the method adopted by pragmatists, namely, the method which inquires into the causes of our judging things to be true, in the hope of thereby discovering what truth means. Let us grant to the pragmatists, in order to avoid disputes concerning what is unimportant, that what causes people to judge that a belief about which a doubt has arisen is true is the fact that this belief is found to further the purposes which led us to inquire into its truth. Then, to judge that a belief is true means that this belief furthers our purposes, in the sense in which the cloud means rain, that is, there is a causal connection between them. But truth is not the same thing as furthering our purposes any more than the cloud is the same thing as rain. When we say that a belief is true, the thought we wish to convey is not the same thought as when we say that the belief furthers our purposes. Thus, true does not mean furthering our purposes in the sense in which pluie means rain. Thus, pragmatism does not answer the question, what is in our minds when we judge that a certain belief is true? We find pragmatists, when pressed, willing to admit this fact, Thus, Dr. Schiller says, footnote 1, Studies in Humanism, page 144, end of footnote 1, quote, "In a sense, therefore, the predictions of good and bad, true and false, and so on, may take rank with the experiences of sweet, red, loud, hard, and so on, as ultimate facts which need be analyzed no further." End of quote. To which he adds in a footnote, quote, "The purport of this remark is to confute the notion, which seems dimly to undersie some intellectualist criticisms, that the specific character of the truth predication is ignored in pragmatist quarters." End of quote. This fundamental meaning of truth is treated by Dr. Schiller as unimportant, because it does not enable us to distinguish the cases in which we have rightly predicated truth from those in which we have done so wrongly. The pragmatist test, he maintains, enables us to distinguish the truly true from the falsely true. An untested predication of truth he calls truth as claim. A predication which is subsequent to the application of the pragmatist test he calls truth validated. The distinction between the two is treated at length in his essay on The Ambiguity of Truth, footnote 1, Studies in Humanism, pages 141 through 162, end of footnote 1. This ambiguity appears to us to be wholly non-existent. The distinction involved is the distinction between what is true and what is thought to be true. The reader who will, throughout this essay on the ambiguity of truth, substitute butter for truth and margarine for falsehood, will find that the point involved is one which has no special relevance to the nature of truth. There is butter as claim, that is, whatever the grocer calls butter. This, we will suppose, includes margarine. There is butter validated, which is butter that, after the usual tests, has been found not to be margarine. But there is no ambiguity in the word butter. When the grocer, pointing to the margarine, says, "This is butter," he means by butter precisely what the customer means when he says, "This is not butter." To argue from the grocer's language that butter has two meanings, one of which includes margarine while the other does not, would be obviously absurd. Similarly, when the rash man, without applying any tests, affirms, "This belief is true," while the prudent man, after applying suitable tests, judges, "This belief is not true," the two men mean the same thing by the word true, only one of them applies it wrongly. Thus, Dr. Schiller's reasons for regarding the specific character of the truth predication as unimportant are not valid. We must now return to the two senses of meaning and show how they are relevant to our problem. It is evident that, in the sense in which the meaning of a word is what is in our minds when we use the word, the meaning of the word truth is just that specific character of the truth predication, which, as Dr. Schiller confesses, is something quite other than furthering our purposes. His contention is that the beliefs of which we can predicate truth truly are those which further our purposes. And his reason for saying this is that the beliefs which further our purposes are those which we persist in calling true after reflection. But that only proves that these are the beliefs which we continue to think true, not that these are the beliefs which are true. Owing, however, to confusion of the two senses of meaning, he is led to argue that usefulness gives the meaning of truth, and that, therefore, when a belief is useful, it must be true. All that really follows, if we grant the whole of the psychological argument, is that beliefs which are found to be useful will continue to be thought true. This is an entirely different proposition, and one which, by itself, throws no light whatever either upon the nature of truth or upon what beliefs are in fact true. It may well be that beliefs which fulfill certain purposes are true, while beliefs which fulfill others are not true. Or, again, that there is no connection whatever between truth and usefulness. Dr. Schiller's argument, and William James's, for the two are practically identical on this point, involves a variety of the very assumption which he criticizes in others, namely, the assumption that all our beliefs are true. In pragmatism, the assumption is that the beliefs which we persist in holding must be true. It is then pointed out how very unreasonable our grounds often are for persisting in a belief, and this fact, instead of being used to throw doubt on the belief, is used to discredit reasonableness. Thus we are brought back to the standpoint of the will to believe, and we find that the precepts of that essay really underlie the whole pragmatist theory of truth. But the superstructure is so vast that pragmatists appear to be no longer aware of the foundations upon which their edifice is reared. We may now restate the pragmatist theory of truth in bald outline, giving due prominence to presuppositions of which pragmatists themselves are perhaps not fully conscious. Their major premise is this: beliefs which persist after a doubt has been raised are true. Their minor premise is: beliefs which are found to be serviceable persist after a doubt has been raised. Hence it follows that such beliefs are true. The pragmatist then turns around and exhorts us to cherish such beliefs on the ground that they are true. But if his psychology was right, the exhortation is needless, since by his minor premise, we certainly shall cherish such beliefs. His major premise should be: beliefs which we cherish after you have raised a doubt are true. But those who have raised the doubt can hardly be expected to be much impressed by this premise. The argument is a form of the old refutation of an opponent by the contention that the whole human race thinks as you do, which is a somewhat unsuccessful weapon against a human being who does not think as you do. It is now time to turn our attention to the metaphysic which Dr. Schiller has based upon the pragmatist theory of truth. Pragmatism as such professes to be only a method. The metaphysical doctrine which Dr. Schiller derives from it he calls humanism. In regard to metaphysics, pragmatism professes to be a kind of universal provider, willing and able to suit all tastes. As William James puts it, quote, "Against rationalism as a pretension and a method, pragmatism is fully armed and militant. But, at the outset at least, it stands for no particular results. It has no dogmas and no doctrines save its method. As the young Italian pragmatist Papini has well said, it lies in the midst of our theories like a corridor in a hotel. Innumerable chambers open out of it. In one you may find a man writing an atheistic volume. In the next, someone on his knees praying for faith and strength. In a third, a chemist investigating a body's properties. In a fourth, a system of idealistic metaphysics is being excogitated. In a fifth, the impossibility of metaphysics is being shown. But they all own the corridor, and all must pass through it if they want a practicable way of getting into or out of their respective rooms." End of quote. Footnote 1. Pragmatism, page 54. End of footnote 1. In spite of this Catholicity, however, we agree with Dr. Schiller in thinking that his metaphysic is the one which naturally results from pragmatism. It will be remembered that, in considering induction, we pointed to the dependence of inductive verification upon an appeal to facts. Humanism, as a metaphysic, results from the application of pragmatic method to the question, what is a fact? This subject has been treated by Dr. Schiller in his essay on The Making of Reality. Footnote 1. Studies in Humanism, pages 421 through 451. End of footnote 1. The main purpose of humanist metaphysics is to emphasize the primacy of the will. The will, it is true, requires a datum of fact to which to apply its operations, but this datum is itself the product of previous volitions, and although we cannot quite deny some original hylae, which has been molded by will, yet this is remote and unimportant, and has been transformed into genuine reality by the agency of human beings and other beings more or less resembling them. Nothing that can be known, nothing that can properly be called real, is independent of the knower. There is no such thing as mere knowing, in which we passively apprehend the nature of a merely given object. All knowing is bound up with doing, and everything that we know has been in some degree altered by our agency. This, Dr. Schiller says, is obvious in the case of our acquaintances, who plainly are more or less affected by the fact that we are acquainted with them. When we say that something is independent of our knowing, we mean, according to him, that the thing is not aware that we know it. But as a matter of fact, everything we know, even a stone, is aware of us in its own way. To the charge that this is hylozoism, Dr. Schiller replies by admitting it. The grounds for these opinions are not set forth quite so clearly as could be wished, but we may gather them from a complimentary allusion to Hegel's dialectic at the beginning of the essay. Imagine some fact in regard to which we entertain a belief. The belief leads to action, and the action alters the fact. If it alters it into harmony with our wishes, the belief is proved to have been what pragmatists call true, since it has proved successful in action. In this case, since the belief in the fact is true, it follows that the fact is real. Thus, the belief has made the fact. But if the outcome of the belief is a fact which, though in harmony with the wishes which originally led us to concern ourselves with the matter, is in conflict with others of our wishes, the belief is not true as regards these other wishes. Hence we shall have to change our belief and take fresh action on the new belief, and so bring the fact into harmony with these new wishes. In this way, so long as we have any unsatisfied wishes, we are led on in a cycle of beliefs and actions, the beliefs becoming gradually truer, and the facts with which the beliefs are concerned becoming gradually more real, as greater harmony is established between the facts and our wishes. The motive power of this whole development is the pragmatic definition of truth. For if we believe A to be a fact, that belief is true if it is successful as a means to satisfying our wishes. Hence, so long as our wishes are not completely satisfied, the belief that A is a fact is not completely true, and therefore A is not completely a fact. Thus, complete truth and complete reality go hand in hand, and both are only to be found at the end of the road, which leads to the complete satisfaction of all our wishes. The similarity of the above process to the Hegelian dialectic is emphasized by Dr. Schiller. With his inveterate love of a pun, he has christened this process trialectic. He does not seem, however, to have observed that his process, like Hegel's, introduces a distinction between appearance and reality. That appearance embraces the whole of the world as we know it, and that it is only to reality that the pragmatic test of truth applies. The facts which he can accept as real must be such as not to thwart our purposes. The facts which appear are very often such as to thwart our purposes. if a fact is such as to thwart our purposes, the pragmatist test of truth is not fully applicable to it. For by believing that it will thwart our purposes, we do not prevent it from doing so, and our belief, though possibly preferable pragmatically to any other, does not secure the satisfaction of our desires. If, on the other hand, we believe that the fact is not such as to thwart our purposes, we believe what, ex hypothesi, is not the case. Hence, it follows that such facts cannot be real. Since many apparent facts thwart our purposes, we are led to distinguish between real and apparent facts. Hence, it is not here on earth that pragmatism applies, but only in Dr. Schiller's heaven, just as it is only in Mr. Bradley's heaven that Mr. Bradley's metaphysic applies. The whole doctrine, therefore, reduces itself to the proposition that it would be heavenly to live in a world where one's philosophy was true, and this is a proposition which we have no desire to controvert. The distinction between appearance and reality is one which Dr. Schiller is never weary of attacking. Indeed, a very large proportion of his writings is directed against it. His complete reality, he holds, is being progressively realized, and is not, like the absolute, something wholly unconnected with our actual world of appearance. But his only reason for supposing that his complete reality is being progressively realized is a tacit assumption of cooperation among the agents composing the universe. He assumes, that is, that the various desires which, according to him, form the motive power of all that occurs in the universe are not such as to counteract each other. The world's activities are not to be conceived as a tug of war. For this view there is, we fancy, no argument except the pragmatic argument, that it is pleasant and cannot be conclusively disproved. Thus the whole humanist metaphysic rests upon the pragmatic theory of truth, and falls with that theory. Moreover, it introduces, in a slightly modified form, the old distinction of appearance and reality, of which the difficulties have been admirably set forth by Dr. Schiller himself. Since the distinction, and therefore the difficulties, result inevitably from the pragmatic theory of truth, they afford a new argument against that theory. For they show that the theory is applicable, not to our actual world, but to an ideal world, where all the hopes of pragmatists have been realized. Although, for the reasons alleged above, we do not ourselves accept the pragmatist philosophy, we nevertheless believe that it is likely to achieve widespread popularity, because it embodies some of the main intellectual and political tendencies of our time. This aspect of pragmatism deserves consideration, since the influence of a doctrine, as pragmatists have very prudently pointed out, is by no means proportional to its intellectual value. On the intellectual side, pragmatism embodies skepticism, evolution, and the new insight into the nature and scope of scientific induction. On the political side, it embodies democracy, the increased belief in human power which has come from the progress of mechanical invention, and the Bismarckian belief in force. The skepticism embodied in pragmatism is that which says, since all beliefs are absurd, we may as well believe what is most convenient. This is by no means a new contention. In England it has been popularized by Mr. Balfour's Foundations of Belief and Notes on Insular Free Trade. Skepticism is of the very essence of the pragmatic philosophy. Nothing is certain, everything is liable to revision, and the attainment of any truth in which we cannot rest securely is impossible. It is therefore not worth while to trouble our heads about what really is true. What is thought to be true is all that need concern us. Instead of the old distinction between true and false, we adopt the more useful distinction between what we persist in thinking true and what merely seems true at first sight. Later on, the old meanings of true and false may slip back unnoticed, and we may come to think that what is true in the pragmatic sense is true in the old sense also. This happens especially in regard to religion. But on pragmatist principles, there is no reason to regret this, for the true is what it is useful to believe, and therefore it is useful to believe what pragmatism declares to be true. Skepticism, therefore, though necessary at the start, must be banished later on if we are to get the full benefits of pragmatism. In this, there is no great psychological difficulty, since, as Hume confessed, the skeptical attitude is one not easily maintained in practice. The philosophy of evolution has also had its share in generating the pragmatic tone of mind. It has led people to regard everything as fluid and in process of development, everything as passing by imperceptible gradations into everything else. Some biologists, it is true, have begun to regard development as discontinuous, proceeding by the sudden appearance of freaks. But philosophers and the general public have not been influenced by this change. Hence it has come to be felt that all sharp antitheses, such as that of true and false, must be blurred, and all finality must be avoided. We must always build a road by which everything can pass into everything else at a leisurely pace and with small steps. Instead of the true, we shall have the more true, or the most true up to date. And between different claimants for truth, we must provide a struggle for existence, leading to the survival of the strongest. All this is admirably effected by the pragmatist theory of truth. Monsieur Bergson, whom pragmatists claim as an ally, may be regarded as embodying this tendency. The influence of modern theories of scientific induction has probably been more restricted, in point of numbers, than the influence of skepticism or of evolution, but the men influenced have been important by their scientific eminence. We may take as their protagonist Monsieur Poincaré, who, while not extending the pragmatist doctrine to particular facts, has dealt in a thoroughly pragmatic spirit with the general hypotheses of logic, mathematics, and physics, showing that what leads to the acceptance of a scientific hypothesis is its convenience. Such general assumptions as causality, the existence of an external world, and so on, cannot be supported by Mill's canons of induction, but require a far more comprehensive treatment of the whole organized body of accepted scientific doctrine. It is in such treatment that the pragmatic method is seen at its best, and among men of science, its apparent success in this direction has doubtless contributed greatly to its acceptance. The influence of democracy in promoting pragmatism is visible in almost every page of William James's writing. There is an impatience of authority, an unwillingness to condemn widespread prejudices, a tendency to decide philosophical questions by putting them to a vote, which contrast curiously with the usual dictatorial tone of philosophic writings. Dr. Schiller at one time set to work to elucidate the question of a future life by taking a poll. Footnote 1. See his essay on the desire for immortality, Humanism, pages 228 through 249. We do not, of course, suggest that he would have considered the result of the poll decisive, even if the electorate had been larger. End of footnote 1. William James claims, for the pragmatist temper, quote, the open air and possibilities of nature, as against dogma, artificiality, and the pretense of finality and truth. End of quote. A thing which simply is true whether you like it or not, is to him as hateful as a Russian autocracy. He feels that he is escaping from a prison, made not by stone walls, but by hard facts, when he has humanized truth and made it, like the police force in a democracy, the servant of the people instead of their master. The democratic temper pervades even the religion of the pragmatists. They have the religion they have chosen, and the traditional reverence is changed into satisfaction with their own handiwork. Quote, "The Prince of Darkness," James says, "may be a gentleman, as we are told he is, but whatever the God of earth and heaven is, he can surely be no gentleman." End of quote. Footnote 2. Pragmatism, page 72. End of footnote 2. He is rather, we should say, conceived by pragmatists as an elected president, to whom we give a respect which is really a tribute to the wisdom of our own choice. A government in which we have no voice is repugnant to the democratic temper. William James carries up to heaven the revolt of his New England ancestors. The power to which he can yield respect must be a George Washington rather than a George III. Closely connected with this democratic spirit is the belief in human power, which is one of the dominant notes of pragmatism. By the progress of mechanical invention, the possibilities of our command over nature have been shown to be much greater than they were formerly supposed to be, and no definite limits can be set to them. Hence has arisen, especially in America, where the economic conditions are favorable, and the chief concern of most people is with those matters in which recent advances have been greatest, a general feeling that by energy and hope all obstacles can be overcome, and that it is a mark of laziness or pusillanimity to admit that anything is impossible. The habit of mind which believes that there are no essential impossibilities has been fostered by the doctrine of evolution, with its literary corollary of the Übermensch. Hence have arisen a self-confidence and a pride of life, which in many ways remind one of the Renaissance, and establish some affinity between historical humanism and its modern namesake. For the modern humanism is essentially the philosophy which is appropriate, as Dr. Schiller himself has said, to, quote, "the young, the strong, the virile." End of quote. Footnote 1. Humanism, page 8. End of quote. The inventor, the financier, the advertiser, the successful men of action generally, can find in pragmatism an expression of their instinctive view of the world. Such men, both for good and evil, expect the world to be malleable to their wishes, and in a greater or less degree find their expectation justified by success. Hence arises a disbelief in those hard facts which pragmatists tend to deny, and a confidence of victory in contests with the outer world, whether these contests be cognitive or more directly practical. An Italian pragmatist has expressed this confidence in victory as follows, quote, "Dio è perfetto perché è omnipotente. Sostituiamo, dunque, al misticismo della rinunzia, dell'imitazione di Cristo, il misticismo della conquista, dell'imitazione de Dio." End of quote. Footnote 1. Leonardo, April 1905, L'imitazione de Dio, page 64. End of footnote 1. Other pragmatists have been less explicit than this modern Thomas à Kempis, but he has correctly expressed the spirit of their philosophy. From the confidence of victory in contests, it is an easy passage to the love of contest. For this, pragmatism provides full scope. The many different truths as claim must fight it out among themselves, and the victor will become truth validated. Dr. Schiller, on one occasion, implicitly confesses that, with his theory of truth, persecution can actually make a doctrine true, which would otherwise be false, since it can make a doctrine, quote, useful to our lives, end of quote. Footnote 2. Humanism, page 59. Quote, delicate questions may arise out of the fact that not only does what works receive social recognition, but also that what receives social recognition for this very reason largely works. End of quote. End of footnote 2. In the absence of any standard of truth other than success, it seems evident that the familiar methods of the struggle of existence must be applied to the elucidation of difficult questions, and that ironclads and maxim guns must be the ultimate arbiters of metaphysical truth. The worship of force, as we find it in Nietzsche, is not to be found in the same form in William James, who, though he lauds the will and the life of action, does not wish action to be bellicose. Nevertheless, the excessive individualism of the pragmatic theory of truth is inherently connected with the appeal to force. If there is a non-human truth which one man may know, while another does not, there is a standard outside the disputants to which, we may urge, the dispute ought to be submitted. Hence a pacific and judicial settlement of disputes is at least theoretically possible. If, on the contrary, the only way of discovering which of the disputants is in the right is to wait and see which of them is successful, there is no longer any principle except force by which the issue can be decided. It is true, of course, that in a private dispute, the public opinion of the community, especially as embodied in the law, will usually compel a peaceful decision. But this public opinion is formed, at least in theory, upon an objective estimate of the rights and wrongs of the case. In place of this, if pragmatism were the accepted creed, public opinion would have to be guided by the interests of the community. To this there would be no objection if, as would commonly be done, the maintenance of justice could be taken as one of the ends which it is in the interest of the community to pursue. But in a pragmatist community, this would be impossible, since justice is derivative from the interests of the community, and not an independent constituent of those interests. In international matters, owing to the fact that the disputants are often strong enough to be independent of outside control, these considerations become more important. If the pragmatist urges that always and everywhere the only ultimate arbiter in a dispute must be force, the reply is that, although this is true at the actual moment of the battle, it is yet not true in a wider sense, since it ignores the motives which generate the force on either side. The hopes of international peace, like the achievement of internal peace, depend upon the creation of an effective force of public opinion, formed upon an estimate of the rights and wrongs of disputes. Thus it would be misleading to say that the dispute is decided by force, without adding that force is dependent upon justice. But the possibility of such an opinion depends upon the possibility of a standard of justice which is a cause, not an effect, of the wishes of the community. And such a standard of justice seems incompatible with the pragmatist philosophy. This philosophy, therefore, although it begins with liberty and toleration, develops, by inherent necessity, into the appeal to force and the arbitrament of the big battalions. By this development, it becomes easily adapted to democracy at home and to imperialism abroad. Thus, here, again, it is more delicately adjusted to the requirements of the time than any other philosophy which has hitherto been invented. To sum up, pragmatism appeals to the temper of mind which finds on the surface of this planet the whole of its imaginative material. which feels confident of progress and unaware of non-human limitations to human power, which loves battle with all the attendant risks because it has no real doubt that it will achieve victory, which desires religion as it desires railways and electric light, as a comfort and a help in the affairs of this world, not as providing non-human objects to satisfy the hunger for perfection and for something to be worshipped without reserve. But for those who feel that life on this planet would be a life in prison if it were not for the windows into a greater world beyond, for those to whom a belief in man's omnipotence seems arrogant, who desire rather the stoic freedom that comes of mastery over the passions than the Napoleonic domination that sees the kingdoms of this world at its feet, in a word, to men who do not find man an adequate object of their worship, the pragmatist's world will seem narrow and petty, robbing life of all that gives it value, and making man himself smaller by depriving the universe which he contemplates of all its splendor. End of chapter 4.